Hello if you're new, welcome back if you're not. It is time for Ted to talk boxing. Episode 2 of No Punches Pulled. There was this documentary about the Klitschko brothers. I forget when it was, but I remember it had this great analogy to sum up the two brothers, their respective strengths and weaknesses. And it said that Vladimir was like clay. He was easier to mould in the gym, to take on the basic fundamentals of boxing and then replicate it in sparring or in a fight, though he could be broken. Whereas Vitali was like concrete, inflexible to the instructions of coaches, more insistent on his weird brand of leaning back and awkwardly probing at you. But he was harder to break. As the years have gone on, I think it's quite clear that Vladimir was the greater fighter. He achieved more, much longer reign, beat much better fighters. But a lot of people feel that Vitali was the better of the two, the more reliable pick in a fight. And when we're talking fantasy-wise, in a head-to-head sense against all heavyweight legends, you will often see Vitali's name popping up quite a lot. But I simply do not feel that there is the evidence to back up that claim. Vitali Klitschko's real worth as a fighter, a lot of it comes from his loss against Lennox Lewis in 2003. It was very exciting. There was never a rematch. If you were on the internet back then, or you remember the boxing forums, that just people kept banging on about that again and again. There was controversy about how the cut was caused. And it did open up a bit of a wound, no pun intended, that was never fully resolved or healed because we didn't get the rematch. But Lennox Lewis was an older champion. He came in at a career heaviest. He was 37 years of age. And while it's true that Lennox Lewis did age better, he was a bit of a fine wine because his style was one that aged better naturally. The problems that come with age, the slowing down of reflexes, they weren't as incriminating on Lennox Lewis's style. But he was definitely exiting his drinking window, if we're to keep with the wine analogy. He was going a little bit vinegary at this stage, for sure. And one of the clearest examples of why Lennox Lewis was truly past his best at this point was what Manny Stewart said in the build-up. He had said that Lennox Lewis had trained as hard for Vitali Klitschko as he had for the first Evander Holyfield fight. Now, if you look at Lennox Lewis's condition in the first Holyfield fight, which was March 99, he's in tremendous condition. He was about 34, of course, younger, but he looked immaculate. A beast of a man. Aesthetically, you look at his body, just forgetting the fact that he was heavier, he clearly is not in the same condition. Controversial. But Vitali Klitschko, yes, he was up on the scorecards. He was battling a guy who clearly was not able to get into the same condition anymore. The body was not allowing it. If he really did train as hard for Vitali as he did for Holyfield, it's obvious that the body was no longer following his will. So the question really falls on, who did Vitali Klitschko beat? Because opposition is king. We talk about the stats. He never got floored. He barely dropped rounds. But who were his best opponents? Kirk Johnson? Corey Sanders? One of those, maybe Samuel Peter? And the first two I picked there, Kirk Johnson and Corey Sanders, they were in very poor condition when Vitali fought them. Not his fault, but he didn't even beat prime versions of these guys. Opposition is king when you're trying to measure how good somebody is, because it's all about how much resistance has this guy got to deal with? What barriers has he got to break through? Kirk Johnson, Corey Sanders. Sanders got him with a good left hand in the first round, which made Vitali back up. And no, he never was flawed in his career. But now some people will tell you that he has one of the best chins of all time. But it simply wasn't proven enough. The best chins of all times are ones that have been hit multiple times. They've gone through all kinds of wars, campaigns. Vitali was hit with a tremendous uppercut by Lennox Lewis in round 6, and he was cracked good by Corey Sanders with a left in the first round of their fight. But outside of that, how many times was Vitali really tagged clean? He obviously had a solid chin, like Floyd Mayweather, but he also had abilities in the same sense as Mayweather, whereby he didn't have to get punched very often. Mayweather was able to use a conventional defense to block and get away from most punches, and his range. Vitali used his range in leaning back to get away from most punches. With Floyd Mayweather, he clearly had a solid chin, but he simply did not get hit enough to give him a title of one of the best chins of all time. The same goes with Vitali. So we have the efficiency with the fact he never got dropped, how dominant he was against his guys. And then we have the claims of the great chin as well, but we simply don't have the great opponents, the wins against them. And he didn't get tagged enough to validate both of those statements. He was clearly a tough guy to fight. Awkward. Tough, yes. Decent power. But when you haven't really beaten that many good opponents, when your competition is so inferior in terms of your wins versus your brothers, it's just, where do you begin to make the case? Other than pure size, a lot of people will tell you that Vitali Klitschko would easily beat Joe Frazier. But when you get to the bottom of it and you just ask, well, why? Isn't this just a bit of a leap of faith? They'll just say, size, basically. But there is more evidence to suggest the opposite. Vitali Klitschko, having never fought anyone of a style and ferocity like Joe Frazier, who's to say that Frazier would not be a stylistic nightmare for the giant Ukrainian? Make him fight at a range and a pace that he just would not like at all. I certainly do rate Vitali Klitschko as a head-to-head force. If I was managing a fighter, I would certainly wince at the prospect of that fight. But I wouldn't necessarily feel I'm going up against some unstoppable force. The idea of him as some absolute head-to-head monster, I don't think, is really justified.